Dear students and viewers, I welcome you all on BioCareer Cascade, a platform to share and transfer knowledge in the field of biology. So, here I am in front of you with a new video. So, before starting the new video or new topic, I will just recap the previous topics. So if you remember that we were discussing about innate immunity, in which we mentioned that we divided innate immunity into two categories: first line of defense and second line of defense. You can see first line of defense and second line of defense. So in first line of defense, we said external barriers comes under the category of first line of defense, in which we discuss about the anatomic barriers. Okay. Then the second line of defense, we mentioned that they are called as internal barriers, in which we discussed about physiological barriers. Then we discussed about phagocytic barriers. And today in this video, we are going to discuss about inflammatory barriers. Just to remind you that innate immunity is non-specific in nature, it do not possess any specificity, and it do not provide any memory. So innate immunity is non-specific in nature and do not provide any memory. So therefore, all the barriers, external as well as internal barriers, they are also non-specific in nature and do not provide any memory. So let's start the today's topic, inflammatory barrier, or you can say the inflammation. Okay. So today within this innate immunity, we are going to discuss about inflammatory barrier, or you can say the inflammation. So before I will start this topic, inflammation, I will show you these two photographs. The first one is Roman physician Celsus, while the second one is Greek physician Galen. So we will discuss about these two physicians in the upcoming slides and their contribution in this inflammatory process. So let's start the topic inflammation. So whenever you will see this word inflammation, you should think about certain questions. What are these questions? First one is, what is inflammation? Second one is, when this inflammation takes place? Third one is, why this inflammation is required? What is the need of this inflammatory process? Then, how this inflammation protect you from the invading pathogens, and what is the process of inflammation. So in this video we are going to answer all these four questions, and if we will answer these four questions, it means we will be able to understand this process inflammation. So let's start with the first question, that what is inflammation. So inflammation is a response of host immune system against tissue injury. So होस्ट इम्यून सिस्टम का किसी भी टिश्यू इंजरी के अगेंस्ट में जो रेस्पॉन्स होता है उसको हम क्या कहते हैं? इन्फ्लामेशन. So students, please remember this definition properly in the correct way. Inflammation is the response of the host immune system against tissue injury. Whenever there is a tissue injury, then there will be a response against that tissue injury. That response will be containing several complex reactions, and all these complex reactions together is called as inflammation, or you can say inflammatory response. So first question, what is inflammation, is clear to us now, that it is the response of immune system against the tissue injury. Now we'll see when this inflammation will take place. So what are the causes of inflammation? What are the different causes of inflammation? Okay. So first cause of inflammation is, inflammation can be because of some physical agents. So if like we have already discussed that inflammation is a response against tissue injury. So how this tissue injury can take place? So this tissue injury can take place because of some physical agents. Okay. Then inflammation can be because of chemical agents. So that tissue injury can be because of the physical agents. It can be because of the chemical agents. So physical agents and chemical agents can cause trauma, and which can lead to the inflammatory response. Now, other than chemical agents, infectious agents can also cause inflammation. So infectious agents such as virus, bacteria, fungal infections, or you can say parasites, etc., These infectious agents can cause inflammation. Then next is tissue necrosis. So tissue necrosis can also be responsible for inflammation, or you can say tissue necrosis can also lead to the inflammation. So let's see what is necrosis. What is the meaning of necrosis? Necrosis is a cell death due to the injury. Necrosis क्या होता है? It's a phenomena for the cell death, and cell death because of injury is called as necrosis. And when it takes place in a tissue, then this is called as tissue necrosis. So what happens in the tissue necrosis? The cells which are undergoing cell death, they releases certain pharmacologically important compounds, and these compounds are pro-inflammatory compounds, or you can say inflammatory mediators, and then they can cause inflammation. So inflammation can be because of the tissue necrosis, or you can say because of the cell necrosis. Then immunological reactions can also cause inflammation. Usually immunological reactions are not responsible for inflammation, but there are certain cases such as autoimmune disorders or autoimmunity can lead to the inflammation. Then you can see like complement system, or you can say complement pathways can also lead to the inflammatory response. So these are the various causes of inflammation. So inflammation can be because of the physical agents, inflammation can be because of the chemical agents, infectious agents can also cause inflammation, tissue necrosis can also lead to inflammation, and certain immunological reactions such as autoimmunity and complement system can also lead to the inflammatory response. So with this, we are able to answer this second question, when this inflammation will take place. So when this inflammation takes place, whenever there is a tissue injury because of any of these reasons, then that against that tissue injury, that inflammation process will be stimulated. Now, third question is, why this inflammation is required? What is the need of inflammation? Inflammation की जरूरत क्या है? What is the need? Why this inflammation is required? Now let's see the answer of this question. We need inflammation in order to destroy the microbes. So हमने अभी ऑलरेडी पीछे डिस्कस किया कि इन्फ्लामेशन कब होता है, जब कभी भी कोई टिश्यू इंजरी होती है. सो टिश्यू इंजरी के अगेंस्ट में जो इम्यून सिस्टम का जो रेस्पॉन्स होता है, वो सारी रिएक्शंस को कलेक्टिवली हम कहते हैं इन्फ्लामेशन. सो वेन एवर देयर इज अ टिश्यू इंजरी, देयर मे बी चांसेस ऑफ इन्फेक्शन. तो वहां पे जहां टिश्यू इंजरी हुई है वहां पे माइक्रोब्स एंटर कर सकते हैं, बैक्टीरियल सेल्स एंटर कर सकती हैं. सो इन्फेक्शियस एजेंट्स को रिमूव करने के लिए, उनको डिस्ट्रॉय करने के लिए फ्रॉम द साइट ऑफ टिश्यू इंजरी, we need this inflammatory process. So this inflammatory process is required for the destruction of microbes. Then second point is removal of the toxins. So if these microbes or invading pathogens, if they are secreting certain toxins which can be harmful for the host, then this inflammatory response or inflammation will also help in the removal of these harmful toxins secreted by the invading pathogens. So जो इन्वेडिंग पैथोजेंस होते हैं वो टॉक्सिन सीक्रेट करते हैं विद इन द टिश्यू, इंजर्ड टिश्यू एरिया में, जो कि हार्मफुल होते हैं और प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट कर सकते हैं. तो उन टॉक्सिन्स को रिमूव करने में भी ये इन्फ्लामेशन प्रोसेस हेल्प करता है. देन दिस इन्फ्लामेशन प्रोसेस ऑल्सो स्टॉप द स्प्रेड ऑफ इन्फेक्शन. सो दिस रेस्पॉन्स ऑल्सो स्टॉप द स्प्रेड ऑफ इन्फेक्शन एट द साइट ऑफ इन्फ्लामेशन. तो जहां पे टिश्यू इंजरी हुई है, जहां पे इन्फेक्शन हुआ है, सो ये इन्फ्लामेशन प्रोसेस क्या करता है, वहां पे ही लोकलाइज कर देता है उस इन्फेक्शन को और उसको नॉर्मल हेल्दी सेल्स और टिश्यूज के अंदर स्प्रेड होने से रोकता है. सो दिस इन्फ्लामेशन प्रोसेस लोकलाइज्ड द इन्फेक्शन at the site of inflammation and do not allow this infection to spread in the nearby healthy cells or tissues. So this is another reason why we need inflammation. Then fourth one is inflammation also helps in the repair and healing of the damaged tissue. So you already know that we have already discussed that the inflammation is the process against the tissue injury. So this inflammation also starts the process which will ultimately repair or heal the damaged tissue. जहाँ पे tissue damage हुआ है because of any reason like physical agents, chemical agents or any other infectious agents, वहाँ पे जो tissue injury हुई है उसके हीलिंग प्रोसेस को भी ये इन्फ्लामेशन प्रोसेस स्टार्ट करता है और डैमेज टिश्यू की रिपेयर और हीलिंग करता है. So that's why this inflammation also stimulates the repair and healing of the damaged tissue. That's why we need inflammatory process.
We need this inflammation in order to remove the dead cell debris from the site of tissue damage. So whenever there is a tissue damage, there will be dead cell debris because of the damaged tissues as well as because of the dead cells, dead bacterial cells. So in order to remove all the dead cell debris, we need inflammation. So now we know that why this inflammation is required. We need inflammation in order to destroy or in order to remove the microbes from the site of inflammation, or you can say the site of tissue damage. Then it also helps in the removal of toxins from the site of tissue damage. Inflammation is also required in order to stop the spread of infection. Inflammation also helps in repair and healing process of the damaged tissue. It starts the repair and healing process of the damaged tissue, and inflammation will also helps in the removal of dead cell debris from the site of tissue damage. So now we know that why this inflammation process is required.
I hope we are able to answer this particular question that why this inflammation process is required. So students से मेरा रिक्वेस्ट है कि ये सारी बातों को ध्यान से याद रखें. They are very simple, very easy. If you will go step by step, you will be able to remember each and every point. Okay. So please remember that this inflammatory response, or you can say inflammation, is non-specific in nature. Okay, it is non-specific in nature because it is the part of innate immunity which comes under the category of internal barriers. Okay, it is non-specific in nature and do not provide any memory. Okay, so now we will just discuss about inflammation little bit more in this particular section. So first is inflammatory barriers. So from where we derive this word inflammation. So this inflammation word is derived from a Latin word means inflammatio. So meaning of inflammatio is to set on fire. So this inflammation word is derived from a Latin word inflammatio, which means to set on fire. Now we'll go to the definition of inflammation, or you can say the inflammatory barrier one more time. It's a tissue damaged caused by a wound or by the invading pathogenic microbe induces a complex sequence of events, and these complex sequence of events collectively known as inflammatory response. Whenever there is a tissue injury, and this tissue injury may be because of any agent, it can be because of the physical agent, chemical agents, or any infectious agents. It may be because of the tissue necrosis, it may be because of the immunological reactions. Then this tissue damage induces certain complex reactions, and these all complex reactions collectively called as inflammatory response, or you can say the inflammation, which is non-specific in nature. तो जब भी कोई टिश्यू डैमेज होगा, वो डैमेज टिश्यू एक कॉम्प्लेक्स सीक्वेंस ऑफ रिएक्शंस को स्टिमुलेट कर देता है, और उन सारी कॉम्प्लेक्स सीक्वेंसेस को हम कलेक्टिवली कहते हैं इन्फ्लामेशन. सो ये इसकी डेफिनेशन हो गई, इसको याद रखें सभी स्टूडेंट्स. नाउ tissue damage and infection. Tissue damage and along with that infection, it induces, what it does, it induces leakage of vascular fluid. So जो vessels के अंदर जो fluid होता है, it will leak, and this fluid contains serum proteins, and these serum proteins are actually antimicrobial proteins which possess antimicrobial activity, and along with that lots of influx of phagocytic cells will be there in the damaged tissue. So whenever there is a tissue damage, there will be a leakage of vascular fluid from capillary towards the injured tissue, which contains lots of serum proteins with antibacterial activity. Along with these antibacterial protein, phagocytic cells will also move from capillary towards the injured tissue. And these antibacterial proteins and phagocytic cells, mainly neutrophils and like monocytes, move from capillary to the tissues and become macrophage, and these macrophage and neutrophils, they helps in engulfing these bacterial cells if they are there any in the damaged tissue. And similarly, these antibacterial proteins also helps in killing these bacterial cells or microbes from the site of damage, tissue damage. Now just we'll see this. Suppose if there is a pathogenic bacteria, there is a tissue damage. Along with that, there is a pathogenic bacterial infection. Now, suppose if this pathogenic bacteria is a gram-negative bacteria, then on the surface of that bacteria, there will be LPS, lipopolysaccharide. And in our previous video, we have already discussed that these lipopolysaccharides are also called as pathogen-associated molecular patterns, PAMPs. Now these PAMPs, or you can say LPS, will be recognized by the certain cells via interaction with cell surface receptors, and we already discussed these receptors are called as TLRS, which are present on the surface of phagocytic cells. So these phagocytic cells, through their TLRS, they will recognize this PAM which is present on the surface of this pathogenic bacteria, and then this interaction will trigger an inflammatory response. And with this whole inflammatory response means which includes several complex sequence of reactions, this pathogenic bacteria will be removed and damaged tissue will be repaired, and ultimately there will be the clearance of the invader or pathogenic bacteria from the site of tissue damage. So that's how this whole inflammation process helps you in removing of the invaders or pathogenic invaders. Now we will discuss about some more points related with the inflammation. So whenever there is inflammation, there will be 5 prime signs of inflammation. These 5 prime signs are also called as 5 cardinal signs. So you should always remember what are the 5 prime signs of inflammation. Okay. Then whenever there is an inflammation, whenever there is an inflammatory response, there will be 3 major events which will take place during the inflammatory response. So please remember, all the students, please remember that there will be 5 prime signs of inflammation whenever there is an inflammatory response, and there will be 3 major events during the inflammatory response. So what are these 5 prime signs? First we will discuss about those 5 prime signs. So first one is rubor. Rubor means redness. Okay, so please remember, rubor means redness. Okay. Then second one is, second prime sign or cardinal sign is tumor. Tumor means swelling. Third prime sign is calor. Calor means heat. Fourth prime sign is dolor. Dolor means pain. So these are the first 4 prime signs. Please remember these 5 prime signs: rubor, tumor, calor, dolor. Rubor means redness, tumor means swelling, calor means heat, dolor means pain. So these 5 prime signs were first given by this Roman physician Celsus. So Celsus, Roman physician, is given these 4 prime signs of inflammation. Later on, the 5th prime sign, which is funculacia, which means loss of function, was introduced by this Greek physician Galen. He introduced another 5th prime sign called as funculacia, means loss of function. It is also mentioned in several books that or some other places that funculacia was introduced by Virchow, but I have taken from the immunology book which says that the 5th prime sign funculacia was introduced by Galen. So you can see these are the 5 cardinal signs of inflammation or 5 prime signs of the inflammation. First one is redness. You can see here, whenever there is an inflammation in that particular damaged tissue, there will be the redness in this area. Then tumor means swelling. So whenever there is an inflammation, that damaged tissue area will swell. Then this is called as tumor. Then calor means heat. Whenever there is a tissue injury, in that particular injured area, there will be heat. You will feel warmness in that particular area. Then dolor means whenever there is a tissue injury in that particular area, whenever there is inflammation, you will feel pain in that particular area. So these are the four prime signs, and the fifth one is punctulacia. So that injured tissue loses its physiological function. This is called as loss of function or punctulacia. So I hope these five prime signs must be clear to all of you, which are rubor, tumor, calor, dolor, and punctulacia. Redness, swelling, heat, pain, and loss of function. What are the reasons why these all five prime signs appears during the inflammation? That we will discuss in our upcoming slides, or you can say in the upcoming video. Okay. सो यहाँ तक आपको इतना सारे स्टूडेंट्स को याद हो जाना चाहिए कि पांच प्राइम साइंस क्या है, फाइव प्राइम साइंस क्या है इंफ्लामेटरी प्रोसेस के. ओके, नाउ व्हाट आर दीज थ्री मेजर इंफ्लामेटरी इवेंट्स? These three major events, first one is vasodilation, second one is increase in permeability. So vasodilation means when the diameter of the vessel will increase, then this is called as vasodilation, that we will discuss in the video in upcoming slides, which ultimately this vasodilation ultimately leads to the increase in the capillary permeability. So the capillaries will become more permeable. And then third one is influx of phagocytes. When capillary are permeable, then lots of fluid will move from capillary towards the tissue, and along with that fluid, the influx of phagocytes will be there from capillary towards the tissues. So these three major events uh, will be there during the inflammatory process. So uh, first two events are related with the vascular events, while the third one is related with the cellular event. Okay, so these are the three major events, and these are the five prime signs. Now, along with that, you should always remember 5 R's related with the inflammation. What are these 5 R's? The first one is recognition. So whenever there is an inflammation, the immune system should be able to recognize the site of inflammation. So recognition is the first R. Then what is the second R? Second R is the recruitment. Recruitment of what? Recruitment of the phagocytic cells at the site of tissue damage, or you can say the recruitment of the antibacterial proteins at the site of tissue damage. So first one is recognition, second one is the recruitment, and third one is removal. Removal of the pathogenic invaders, or you can say the bacterial cells, from the site of tissue damage or site of infection. So third R is removal. What is fourth one? Fourth one is regulation. So this whole inflammatory process is a regulated process, and there will be regulation during the inflammation. Then fifth one is repair. So whenever there is inflammation, then there will be tissue damage, and that tissue damage will be ultimately repaired by the inflammatory process. So these are the 5 R's related with the inflammation: recognition, recruitment, removal, regulation, and repair. So please remember 5 prime signs, 3 major events, and 5 R's. Now, next question is how this inflammation takes place. What is the process of inflammation? Okay. So in the upcoming video, we are going to discuss about the process of inflammation. Okay. So as I already mentioned in my previous slide, that there are some major events related with the inflammatory response. What are these major events? First one is vasodilation. Second one is the increased permeability, which is because of the vasodilation. And third one is the influx of phagocytes. So whenever there is an increased capillary permeability, then through this increased capillary permeability, lots of fluid will move from capillary towards the injured tissue, and along with that fluid, lots of phagocytes will also move from capillary towards the injured tissue. Okay, so these are the three major events. So first two events like vasodilation and increased permeability comes under the category of vascular events. So these are the vascular events related with the vessels. Then third one, which is influx of phagocytes, is called as cellular events. It comes under the cellular events. So these are the two major events, vascular events and cellular events. And when these whole events will complete it, then inflammatory process will also complete it. Now, what is vasodilation? We will discuss one by one all these three events. So, what is vasodilation? An increase in the diameter of blood vessel is called as vasodilation. Increase in the diameter of blood vessel is called as vasodilation. जब भी blood vessels का diameter बढ़ जाएगा उसको हम कहते हैं vasodilation. You can see in this figure, this is normal blood vessel and this is the dilated blood vessels. You can see the diameter is already increased. So, which blood vessels of nearby capillaries? So, like, let me clear some points here. Like, uh, blood vessels, the blood vessels are of three types: arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries transport blood away from heart. Then veins, they returns blood back towards the heart. And what capillaries do? Capillaries, they surround body cells and tissues to, to deliver and absorb oxygen, nutrient, and other substances. So these are the three different types of blood vessels: arteries, veins, and capillaries. And here we are discussing about capillaries. So now, of nearby capillaries occurs as the vessels that carry blood away from the affected area constrict. So the vessels which are carrying blood away from the affected area, they constrict, and because of that constrict means that they narrow down. Because of that constriction, resulting into the engorgement of the capillary network. So then there will be the engorgement of the capillary network. What is engorgement? Engorged means cause to swell with blood, water, or fluid. So whenever there is a swelling, because within that swelling there is a blood, or you can say the fluid, then this capillary is called as engorged capillary. So because of the downing of this vessel, there will be the engorgement in the capillary network. And because of that engorgement in the capillary network, the engorged capillaries are responsible for the tissue redness. So lots of blood in the engorged capillary will be there, and because of that, in that particular tissue there will be erythema. So you will see the redness in that particular tissue. So that prime sign which we mentioned earlier, rubor, is because of that particular event. Okay. Then, and an increase in the tissue temperature, and because of that engorged capillary and because of the erythema, there will be the, because of that blood, there will be the little bit high temperature in that particular tissue. So that another prime sign other than rubor, that was calor, means heat, will be there in that particular tissue. Now in this particular figure you can see the vasodilation of the capillary. You can see it's dilating and now it is in the normal position. Okay. Now we will go to the second point, increase in capillary permeability. Okay. So an increase in capillary permeability, what happens because of that? It facilitates an influx of fluid. It facilitates the influx of fluid, and along with that fluid, cells from the engorged capillary into the tissue. So whenever there is a increased capillary permeability, through this increased capillary permeability, lots of fluid will move from this capillary towards the damaged tissue. Lots of fluid will move from capillary towards the injured tissue. And along with that fluid, I already mentioned that the lots of cells will start, especially the neutrophils and monocytes, and when these monocytes enters in the tissue, they become macrophage. These cells will start adhering towards the capillary wall, and slowly they will move from capillary towards the injured tissue. Then the fluid that accumulates, which we called it as the exudate, has much higher protein content than the fluid normally released from the vasculature. So this fluid is moved from the capillary towards the tissues and accumulates in the tissues is called as exudate, and this exudate I already mentioned contains lots of proteins, means contains higher protein content and mainly antibacterial, or you can say antimicrobial protein in that fluid as compared to the normal tissue, normal vasculature. So because of the accumulation of that fluid or exudate, it contributes another prime sign called as swelling, okay, edema, or you can say tumor, okay. So because of that exudate, there will be the swelling in that particular area where inflammation is going on. You can see in this particular animation, because of that accumulation of the fluid, there is a swelling in that particular area where there is a inflammation. Now we will go to the third event, which is cellular event, in which influx of phagocytes will be there towards the damaged tissue. So influx of phagocytes from the capillaries, we have already discussed, into the tissues is facilitated by the increased permeability of the capillary. So whenever there is an increased permeability, through this increased permeability, the lots of fluid will move from capillary towards the tissues. Along with that, phagocytes will also move towards the tissue. So this immigration of these phagocytes from capillary towards the tissues is a multi-step process, in which first step is margination. So whenever these cells has to uh, immigrate from capillary towards the injured tissue, they first marginate themselves on the capillary wall. And what is the process, how they marginate, what are the proteins involved in this margination, that we will discuss in the part 2 of inflammation. Then after margination, they will do diapedesis, or you can say extravasation. They will start moving through these uh, permeable spaces from capillary spaces towards the tissue. They change their shape, they squeeze, and they will cross the capillary and enters into the tissue. You can see here in this animation, this is the capillary and this is the tissue. Now you can see through this capillary in this direction, these RBCs, neutrophils, monocytes, they are circulating. Now, because of this vascular permeability, you can see here, there is a vascular permeability. These phagocytic cells, they adhere themselves on the capillary wall with the help of certain proteins that we will discuss later on. These proteins are present on the surface of these capillary walls because of the activation of these cells by inflammatory mediators. Now with these proteins, the receptors are present on these phagocytic cells against these proteins, and then you can see they bind with these proteins through the receptor and they adhere themselves, and slowly they will squeeze through these spaces and enters into the tissue. This step is called as diapedesis, or you can say the extravasation. So first step is margination. You can see the margination, then you can see the cell is doing this diapedesis or extravasation. After this extravasation, once the cell enters into the tissue, this phagocytic cell will do the chemotaxis. So these injured tissue during the inflammation secretes lots of chemical mediators, and there will be a gradient of these chemical mediators from the site of infection towards the capillary walls. Then these cells will start sensing those chemical mediators and will start moving towards the injured tissue. That is called as positive chemotaxis. So what happens in positive chemotaxis? The cell will sense the chemical mediators and then it starts moving towards the injured tissue. So these chemical mediators can be secreted by both injured tissue as well as by the bacterial cells at the site of inflammation. So these cells, phagocytic cells, they will sense those chemical mediators and they will start moving towards the injured tissue in order to remove the infection from the site of inflammation. So now we have covered the whole process. Now with this particular slide which I have taken from a textbook, I will just try to summarize everything before entering into the details of each and every event, what are the proteins which are required. I will just go through this particular textbook diagram which we have already discussed. So you can see here this is the tissue, from here to here is the tissue, and this is the capillary, and you can see within the capillary the RBCs and other white blood cells, or you can say the phagocytic cells are moving. Now because of that, tissue got injured, and along with that injury several bacterial cells are there. Now you just think that because of that injury the injured tissue starts secreting certain chemical mediators. Now these chemical mediators will go and they will bind here. They will act upon these endothelial cells of the capillary. Once these chemical mediators act on these endothelial cells, I will just give you overview. These endothelial cells start producing certain proteins, specific protein on its surface. These proteins are called as selectins, that we will discuss later on in the part 2. Now with these proteins, against these proteins, these phagocytic cells, they have certain receptors, and because of that these circulating phagocytic cells, they adhere to the wall of this capillary. This process is called as margination. So whenever these phagocytic cells adhere to the capillary walls, this process is called as margination. And these chemical mediators which act upon these cells, they also create vasodilation, or and you can say the vascular permeability, and because of that vascular permeability these marginated cells are able to do the diapedesis, or you can say extravasation. They can cross this capillary and then can enter into the tissue, in the tissue area. So what happens? Tissue damage cause release of the vasoactive and chemotactic factors that triggers the local increase in the blood flow and capillary permeability. So you can see this capillary permeability is there because of these chemical mediators. The permeable capillaries allow an influx of fluid. So along with this permeable capillary, lots of fluid will move. Along with that fluid, lots of cells, phagocytic cells will move. The movement of phagocytic cells is a multi-step process in which first step is margination, then second step is diapedesis or extravasation. Then once they entered into the tissue, they will sense the chemical mediators coming from these damaged tissue or the pathogen-associated molecular patterns of the bacterial cells which are present at the site of inflammation. Then these cells will start moving towards that damaged tissue. That process is called as chemotaxis. And then you can see here it is written that phagocytes migrates to the site of inflammation through chemotaxis. You can see this phagocytic cell is moving towards the injured tissue or towards the bacterial cell. Now next step is these phagocytes and antibacterial proteins, or you can say the exudate, the fluid, destroy these pathogenic bacteria. Okay, so these bacterial cells will be removed by these phagocytic cells, and I will just mention here the main population of these migrating cells are neutrophils and monocytes. And monocytes, when enter here, they will become macrophage, and these cells will engulf these bacterial cells. When they interact with these bacterial cells through their TLRS, they also secrete certain chemical mediators, and these chemical mediators will go and they also activate the immune system. They go into the bone marrow and they start the production of lots of, you can say, the phagocytic cells through leukocytosis. Okay, So this is another process. Now these chemical mediators will also do one more thing. They will start the movement of platelets towards the injured tissue. So now these platelets will go from here to the injured tissue, and then they will start the repair process, healing of the damaged tissue. So ultimately the tissue will be repaired, all the bacterial cells and damaged debris will be engulfed by these phagocytic cells, and ultimately all the cells will be removed from this site, and this damaged tissue will regain its original state as of the before the this injury. So the initial events are called as vascular events, which are related with this blood vessel, and then the movement of these cells from capillary towards the site of infection is called as cellular events. So in this particular video, I will just close this video at this point, and in upcoming video I will discuss this whole process in detail, step by step. What are the different chemical mediators involved in this inflammatory process, how these cells migrate, what are the proteins involved in this migration, and other things. I hope this video will be very helpful for you in order to understand the inflammatory process. See you again in my next video with inflammation part 2. Thank you very much. If you like this video, please subscribe my channel, like this video, and also share this video and my channel with your friends.